2 minutes, 16 seconds. No, that's not how short this review is. No, don't jump ahead to that time index. This is a retro game review of Combat for the Atari Video Computer System, also published as Tank Plus for the Sears Video Arcade. You're probably more familiar with these console units being referred to as the Atari 2600. Now, most online reviews you'll come across are going to have a thumbs up and down system, or a blank out of 5, blank out of 10, or whatever, or even a star rating, perhaps even a rankings list. And while I have experimented with these styles of reviews in the past, I end up disagreeing with my own opinion, just like a few months down the line. What you're going to get here is a brief overview, accompanied by my experience. And while the experience is my own personal one, you're permitted to have your own. I will try to address how I would have, or did in the event that I had the game in my youth, enjoyed the game in its early days, and address how it holds up today. Where does the sound and graphics contend with other games from the era and/or console? And most importantly, is it fun? Who can get enjoyment out of it all these years later? Before I dive into the game, I highly recommend you check out the Atari Archive YouTube channel. It's a channel I just can't stop recommending, and it's well researched with good production value, great research, well edited, and fantastically researched. I'll link that channel's combat video in the description below. It'll give you a better understanding of the time, the inspiration for the game, and the home gaming market of a bygone era. And a lot of good research went into it. I don't know the person/people associated with the channel. I'm just a big fan. Giving them the thumbs up right now, right here. If you find yourself buying game lots online, you inevitably end up with numerous cartridges of Combat. While the box art, manuals, and game labels may or may not have undergone multiple iterations, the gameplay is the same. This is not a cart to seek out. You'll get plenty of copies organically and accidentally if you find yourself collecting Atari 2600 games. As a pack-in title for a long time, these carts have a greater abundancy today than Amazon gift card offers, but not by much. Combat is a 2-player simultaneous only game, which is really, truly going to hurt my experience of the game, as I'm a lone gamer without much opportunity to share the experience with another player. That said, it has some interesting aspects that I wish to get into. But first of all, the basics. The manual spells it all out for The manual spells it all out for you. Of course, you probably have 17 copies of the loose cart, and none of the lots you received came with a manual. But to be honest, it isn't too necessary with a little experimentation. Quite possibly the most valuable page is the game select matrix, especially if you're looking for a specific playfield, game, style, or whatever, to go at it with your buddy. From tank to tank pong, invisible tank to invisible tank pong, biplane and jet fighters as well. Guided versus unguided missiles, machine guns, direct hit, billiard hit, open field sky, easy maze, complex maze, clouds. Certainly there's a combination that's right for you, and far too many for me to go into great detail while maintaining some semblance of brevity for this video. Console switches. For those familiar with the Atari 2600, the switch functions are quite standard. On-off turns the console on and off. Game select advances the game number, so you can pick out the one you want from that game select matrix I mentioned. TV type does what it was originally intended to do. Toggles between a palette for color TVs and one that's better suited for black and white sets, which were still relatively common when the game was first published in 1977. From there, you hit reset, and the game begins. An invisible timer of 136 seconds begins. After 2 minutes, the scores will begin to blink, alerting the players that the final seconds are upon you. A youthful experience. In my youth, this is a game I actually never owned as a youngster. It was readily available to play at the homes of many neighborhood kids, so I wasn't oblivious to its existence. I don't have very many memories of this game as a kid, but a few stand out, and I look back upon them with nostalgia and joy. These memories bring me back to a time with less responsibility, a youthful Evad with his whole future ahead of him, and time spent with friends I have long since lost contact with. It's not the game that I remember so much as playing back then, but the people and events I associate with that game that brings a smile to my face. Look. The game looks good, even by today's standards, in my humble opinion. It's still alright. It won't contend with modern games with graphics, understandably so, but even though it looks old, it still looks good. Okay, some orientations of some of the sprites are a bit grotesque, but for the most part, pretty much everything looks like what it actually is. As we dive into other 2600 titles in the future, we will find that this is not always the case. For the time, I feel this appearance was very acceptable, and if you compare it to pre-2600 home console games, it's very fluid and colorful. Early adopters of the 2600 probably experienced this game before any other 2600 titles. Notable exceptions would be Sears owners with an alternative pack-in, Target Fun, Air Sea Battle. But the appearance of combat, in my opinion, should have really impressed them. The sound. It's fine. The hum of the engine, simple sounds for shots fired and hits registered. Nothing is overdone, and if I get into some specific future 2600 titles that get a bit obnoxious with the audio, combat gets it right with the less is more approach. While I'm not ever going to personally rock out to this soundtrack, or even contemplate adding it to my playlist, it establishes the mood decently, and most importantly, does not hinder the gaming experience. Gameplay. It's great. It does not take long to adapt to the controls. The tanks move a little slow by modern standards, and by my preference as well, but it's fine. Directional motion is based on the pilot's point of view, however, so there is a brief acclimation period as up or left or whatever is reversed if your tank or aircraft is oriented 180 degrees from default. I'm not fussy about this. It wasn't too uncommon back in the day, and really once you play a game or two, the movement and controls feel natural. Other. One interesting aspect I would feel foolish to omit from this review is the collision detection. While in general it's pretty good, in the tank games it can take a bit to get accustomed to. Compounding on that realization is the collision detection that occurs while a tank is taking damage. You can actually get some pretty wonky sprite-to-wall interactions, including, but not limited to, some high-speed screen wraps. Undoubtedly, this was known during the playtesting period, and I can only imagine it was left in for one of the following reasons. 1. Fixing it was too complicated and or put stress on the publish date timetable. Or 2. It's going to blow the minds of gamers in the late 70s, and actually it looks absolutely cool. The one-player experience. This game is meant to be played with someone, and as a result, the one-player experience suffers greatly. I haven't found memories of playing this with friends back in the day, but it's very rare for me to have someone around, with the consideration to play this game at the forefront of my mind. But a few things I did try to get some one-player enjoyment out of it. 1. A high score challenge. Simple, easy, no explanation needed. Okay, I'll explain. See how many times you can hit your unpiloted opponent, then try to beat that score. Visions of Skinner dribbling a basketball with one free arm while trapped under a stack of newspaper comes to mind here. 2. Invisible tank. Set number of shots, fewest misses. Invisible tank is interesting because you can't see yourself or your opponent until you shoot, get hit, or collide. But by setting a rule for yourself like, hey, I'm going to take 15 shots this game and try to minimize my misses, you set a unique challenge. While the opponent won't move in a one-player setting, you still have a difficult time knowing if you have a shot lined up or not. And wasting one to see your position and or orientation is a critical decision when your hits percentage is on the line in this unofficial and completely arbitrary category. Trick shots. Sometimes it can be quite challenging to use the guided missiles function to snipe even an unmoving target. It seems to actually take quite a bit of finesse, and it's something that I have, by no means whatsoever, become a master at. Of course, all these options can be enhanced with a second player as well, but that's how I got some extra mileage out of my many, many combat cards while being the lone active participant in such endeavors. Relevance today. Of course, anyone with nostalgia for this game or is passionate about Atari will be happy to own a copy, and maybe even play from time to time. There's still fun to be had with this title by many. and its simple nature makes it a good pick up and play game, assuming, as mentioned several times through this review, that you have someone to play with. Younger generations are likely to find it old, outdated, poor looking, and poor sounding. Claims I disagree with, but I can understand due to these subjective points coming down to a person's perspective. But I think anyone that is willing to give it a shot to get over these downsides can have a lot of fun with this still, even today. Overall, the look and sound are good. It's a fun game, but really, folks, get a player or two to join you for this. I think almost anyone can find fun in this game if giving it the opportunity. The difficulty switches to change shot distance and aircraft speed can help a novice be competitive against a master. But really, unless the skill division is drastic, even the newest of beginners can rack up a few wins against a more experienced player. Without any relevant RNG or rubber banding AI, the game is intrinsically able to partially equalize the playing field. Combat 216 said I just whooped your ass. It's time for another retro game review. Tonight we break out Mattel Electronics Intelligent Television. Action buttons on both sides of the controller, 16 directional movement, and number keys galore. Welcome to episode 2 and welcome to the Intellivision. I hope you're ready for some fast-paced, hard-hitting action. Oh. Slow-paced card hitting action. It's Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack. My first retro game review here was for Combat for the Atari 2600, a launch title and long-time pack-in. I wanted to do something similar for my first Intellivision game review, and this casino-style card game cartridge fits the bill. I would have preferred to review Armor Battle, as it's more comparable to Combat and still an early release for this console. It could be interesting to have compared and contrasted it with Combat. However, I don't own a copy of Armor Battle at the moment. That ended that dream. Being the pack-in for the Intellivision for quite some time, though, Poker and Blackjack can fit in nicely as my first review of a game for this console. As I did for my Combat video, I highly recommend you watch the Atari Archive's relevant video, this time the one for the Intellivision launch lineup. Link in description. Alright, well, let's insert the cartridge and power. Before we began, one issue I had during some of my recordings, I was getting some graphical glitches. They appear to be related to my console and not the specific cartridge, as I tested it out a few times with multiple carts. I was able to capture footage for this review, but I may need to crack open my console and do some maintenance in the near future. The game manual is not too incredibly relevant, especially if you have general knowledge of the card games included. But this is a game you probably want to have the controller overlays for. Of course, in the internet era, having the physical overlays, or manual for that matter, is far less critical than it would have been in the contemporary setting this game was published in. You have a few game options: 5-card stud, 7-card stud, 5-card draw, blackjack, dealer's choice, and same game. The last of which I assume requires you to actually play a game of something first. Actually, I tested out before publishing the video, but in my EVAD-esque absent-mindedness, I'll forget to rewrite the script, or forget to record the audio, or both. I'm going to assume you have some familiarity with the rules of these card games, because if not, under what circumstances did you ever end up watching this review? I suppose persons passionate about all things Intellivision get a free pass on that question, but the rest of you, really? Really? My youthful experience does not apply here. I had very, very limited experience with Intellivision in my youth, and even as an adult. Card games in a video format didn't really have any appeal to me until I was in my early teens, and that passion faded drastically by my late teens. So as a youth, unless I was exposed to this game during that narrow time range, I probably would have had complete disinterest in it. The look. Without context and without having played the game, I wondered why Mattel would decide to pack in a poker game with their console. At the time of release, home gamers already had an option on the Magnavox Odyssey and two options on the Atari 2600. Paying incredible prices, 300 USD and $1979. You can adjust for inflation yourself, as I don't know what year you are in while watching this. But yeah, paying incredible prices to get a pack-in that isn't very distinctive from options already on the market for consoles you may already own and are therefore paid for? Well, one look at the dealer and you can already see, from a contemporary perspective, what sets this game apart from those pre-existing options. I'm not saying the dealer converted hordes of Atari owners to television, but the subtle and not so subtle facial expressions show off in nearly a subconscious manner that the Intellivision was a superior home console to those already on the market. So much detail goes into the dealer. His wild eyes, creepy 70s mustache, and mannerisms that change based on what's going on within the game. It's great. You can actually find yourself trying to read his face, something you would do with an in-person competition, even with what today would be considered very primitive graphics. Another standout with the look is the card animations. The dealer actually deals them out to you, rather than a computer just spawning the card for you. It doesn't have any impact on the gameplay, and it could have easily been omitted due to lack of cognizance. But the developer realized it could be done, did it, and the game looks better because of it. The cards themselves aren't that interesting, cool, or even all that good looking in my opinion. Some are just barely distinct enough to know what you have, although recognition does improve over time. I suspect this will not be an issue for anyone who plays this game regularly. Type of person I'm not sure that even exists today. As far as appearance is concerned, I'd say it's good. I'd prefer the card sprites to look a little better, but it's not a complaint that I'm passionate enough about to daydream about building a time machine to go back in time and ask, "What's wrong with you?" to the developer. While that statement seems a bit odd, I have fantasized about such things before. Just not gaming related things. The sound. Limited. Not significantly distracting, not amazing. By knowing some of the audio that this console is capable of, the sound is a bit of a letdown. However, it is not to be ignored that early releases for any console often feel in some ways to be significantly inferior to releases near the end of that said console's lifespan. And besides, how much sound are you going to expect playing cards? I'll rate the sound as acceptable. The console can do way better, but just because it can doesn't mean it should. The controls are easy to understand, with overlays. There's not a lot of precision or execution that matter here. As long as all your number pad keys work and at least one direction on your directional disc can recognize inputs. Sorry for putting those qualifiers in there. It took me a long time and much maintenance to get the controllers on my Intellivision good enough to make any game remotely playable. I'm not going to complain too much. I purchased this Intellivision a couple years ago on eBay from a Canadian couple that were unable to test it, and they sold it to me for a pretty good price. But yeah, the gameplay is fine from a control standpoint, because you don't need to control a whole heck of a lot. This is not a platformer, and it doesn't need to handle like one. Where the gameplay does suffer, though, is in the pace of the game. It is painfully slow. While it may have been cutting edge in electronic poker and blackjack back in 1979, 1980 for a more formal release, I have a difficult time thinking anyone in the era would have had a reason to play this, aside for those few that just needed their card fix and didn't happen to have a complete deck of cards in the house. I suspect anybody who did enjoy this back in the day was more interested in the novelty of it, and not by any means thinking it's a better gambling experience than playing with physical cards. The controls are fine, but gameplay still manages to be slow, and I need an adjective. Similar to clunky, but not as rude sounding. Someone in the comments section grab a thesaurus and help me out here. Other. One interesting thing I found in the manual is the following snippet about the dealer. Remember, he's computerized. He talks to you by means of cartoon balloons. Just a byproduct of a past era that I find some degree of humor in today. That someone in charge of the instruction manual felt this needed to be spelled out. Spelled out? Felt this needed to be spelled out to their clientele. The one player experience. This game is meant to be played with someone, and due to the single screen nature of the setup, it means when playing with someone, you must ask them to turn away so you can look at your own cards. Or you could just play knowing what the other player has hidden. I suppose it's up to you to agree upon. The one player experience isn't hindered too much, however. You take turns playing, so if you don't mind being two people, it's playable. The downside being one of the players you control may end up being dealt a card you wanted for your other player. I feel more sophisticated poker players could really get a kick out of card counting strategies playing this way. You know, knowing what 2/3 of the participants have in their hands. I haven't come across any jokers in my dabblings with this game. Evidently, the highly fashionable dealer removed them from the deck. But I retain hope that, should I ever find myself playing against a satire-induced recreation of James Bond, that the rules for drawn stud poker will work its way into the deck. Relevance today. In a single word, obsolete. Who would like this? I can only imagine people with a lot of nostalgia for it. People who love all things in television, or people who have a desire to seek out as many various blackjack poker options as possible would find this game fulfilling. It's neat to visit, and I'm glad I explored it for this video, but I suspect the percentage of the population that will buy this cart, play it, and enjoy playing it over and over is indistinguishable from 0%. Hey, here's your opportunity in the comments section to tell me why I'm wrong and why you are one of the many members of that 0%. Overall, the look is good and the sound is acceptable. It controls fine and the gameplay, although slow, is fine. That stated, I don't see this as a game I will ever really revisit. I had a lot of enjoyment with these types of games on PC in the mid-90s, and if I ever have an itch to play something comparable, the modern era has plenty of options. I would most likely just download an app if I felt the need to poker it up by electronic means. This is a decent game for its time, but as I just mentioned in the Relevance Today section, I can't come up with a more fitting word than obsolete. Next, Atari's answer to Intellivision's 16 directions of control, number keys, and overlays. Let's break out the super system. See you next mission. Now, typically I would tell you to go check out some better game-specific related video content on the subject matter before checking out my review. The trouble this time is nothing on the 5200 port of Super Breakout really stands out. At least, nothing I'm able to find at the time of this recording. I leave it up to you in the comments section. And if I find one I agree with, I'll add it to the video description. So far, all of my recommendations have been for Atari Archive videos, and for good reason. I find them to be superb. There are indeed other content creators that I plan to link to in future reviews. It just so happens that for episodes 1 and 2, Atari Archive's content set the stage so well for the games I was reviewing. You're the pilot of a super-powered space shuttle, and you're blazing a path through distant superclusters at incredible space-age speed. The uncharted planet, Iris, is your destination. You know from preliminary briefing that Iris is surrounded by a mysterious, colorful force field. Astronomers have photographed the iridescent force field with high-powered telescopic cameras. There's much conjecture on Earth as to what the wall of colors around Iris might be, but no one is certain. It's a super day to break out. A new super review. So break out your super analog joysticks. Break out your super controller overlays. Break out your super system. Because it's time for our first 5200 game review, Super Breakout. The Atari 5200 Super System has received a lot of criticisms over the decades. Its monstrous size, the controllers, the limited library, not natively backwards compatible with 2600 games. Well, I could weigh in with my 2 cents. I'm not going to change the mind of anyone with an established opinion. And, quite frankly, my experience with the console is too insufficient to confidently tell newcomers how they should feel about it. It has many, many detractors, even today. But those who truly love the 5200 are not as rare as diamonds, and their passion is admirable and infectious. It's very satisfying to see someone who loves this console defend it with all their heart. And this brings us to a long-time pack-in title for the Super System, Super Breakout. In my youth. My 5200 memories are very few and very, very vague. While I have many memories of playing breakout-style games as a youngster, I cannot conclusively declare if I've ever played Super Breakout on the 5200 in those days. I don't even recall which friend or family member I knew way back then that had the console, but I know I didn't play it very much. It's the kind of game I would have loved as a kid, and even as an early teen, too. By my late teens, home gaming had evolved so much, it's likely my interest would have waned by then. While it's the kind of game I would have loved, this specific port, it's hard to say, for reasons I'll get into soon. Look. It looks good. I mean, it's Breakout. Okay, Super Breakout. But it's the traditional look one would expect to see for a game banning this name in the early 80s. There's a certain crispness to the graphics, the look, and it does, in some hard-to-explain way, have a more aesthetic appearance than its 2600 older sibling. It doesn't seem like they went all out, and as a pack-in, at least for part of the console's lifespan, I'm not completely sure why. It's one of those games for the 5200 that does benefit from the analog joystick, but it doesn't show it off exceedingly well. We'll get into audio in a bit, but the Pokey chip is not unleashed in all its glory for this game. The look, albeit similar to what we have seen in the past, doesn't wow me all too much, especially knowing what else is out there for this system. Maybe I'll do a video covering my take on the pack-ins for various consoles at some point in time. As I get rolling on these reviews, I start seeing more and more interesting decisions for pack-ins, and I'm debating with myself whether or not I should weigh in on some of my opinions regarding these. Anyway, as far as look goes, it's good. Good. It's good, not great. Sound. A step up from the 2600 port? Kind of. I mean, to be honest, with the audio capabilities of this console, it should be a flight of steps up. It's fine, and I don't think anyone with complaints about it, either in the early 80s or today, can back up those complaints with significant substance. But I expect so much more. I mean, the Pokey chip! Pokey chip! Enough said. Gameplay. A good controller keeps good games good. A bad controller spells disaster. And the controller. Oh, the controller. That ever-loving controller. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to evaluate the gameplay for this game, or any 5200 game for that matter. But I'll explain why and then try my best. When I got my 5200, a two-port model, from a previous owner a few years back, it came with two controllers. I had a third one on hand already that I'd gotten in a previous game lot, but all three were problematic. Take apart, clean it, reassemble, minimal improvement. Take apart, clean, reassemble, realize reassembly wasn't quite right. Take apart, reassemble properly, still three duds. After many, many troubleshooting efforts and a bit of conductive tape, I got one of them to be decent. By decent, I mean responsive enough to make games playable. But here's the thing, this controller has such a bad reputation, I have no clue how close to factory performance I was able to get it. I feel silly rating the controls low if I'm using a not working properly controller, but I have nothing else to compare it to. I'm typically not one to cast blame on a controller. If it's bad and you know it, and you do nothing to resolve the issue but to continue to complain, you're the victim of your own negligence. I've stated this many, many times on my stream, and I stand by that declaration. But here we are. So I come here to review my experience of the game, and if that experience includes a potentially faulty controller, so be it. The analog joystick seems like it should be a good fit for this game, and it is, but this is a game that needs fast, precise movement, something I'm unable to do consistently. You want to control your sprite quickly, but stop on a dime, and I do feel I can improve with a lot of practice. I'm not sure how much time I want to invest into this part of this game. And the controls or controller is a large reason why. Aside from that, it is Breakout. The movement is fine, it's natural, it's intuitive. The physics are understandable. It all comes down to your ability to control your paddle sprite. Other. Super Breakout has multiple game modes, and up to 4-player action, if you have a 4-port system. It's fun to mix it up with these game varieties. Breakout, Double, Cavity, and Progressive each have their charm. They didn't go overboard on game variations like so many 2600 titles did. There's enough variation to keep it fresh and not so much as to overwhelm. Relevance today. 5200 Super Breakout is one of the more common titles for this console. Yet its relevance is very minimal. It's more than a footnote, but it's likely to be overlooked, for better or for worse. I feel many will gravitate towards the 2600 Breakout and Super Breakout as opposed to this. I can't blame them too much. Even a paddle with moderate jitter provides the gamer with more control than my 5200 joystick. It's odd to me. This is perhaps the one game that the 5200 significantly benefits from analog joystick controls. But to me, it's just not good enough. Oftentimes I would find myself moving quickly to line up where would want to be and try to stop on a dime. But because of the non-self-centering nature of the 5200 joystick, a decision that is highly criticized today, to come to a complete stop, you have to manually center the joystick. Oftentimes, not pushing it far enough to center and you drift too far, or pushing too far, trying to center it, and backing up, missing the ball in either of those scenarios. I see this game being relevant to some high-score challenge fanatic. I envision this person as an anchor. Okay, I'll think harder. I envision this person staying up all night long. Super Breakout in their 5200. Analog joystick in hand. All the lights out. Just the glow of a 13-inch CRT filling the room. Eyes glued to the screen, only to glance away for a moment to take a sip from an oversized cup of fountain pop. This is the type of person I see playing the game the most in the modern era. As always, those with nostalgia for it will indeed maintain interest in it. These people do exist. I've met them in forums and Discord servers. Their passion is unbelievable. I'm not sure, however, how many new recruits this port of this game will bring in. While the younger crowd does have some curiosity about retro, the 5200 and its library are often overlooked. Tack on a controller with a notorious reputation, and I don't see youths, or even people from my generation, but like me, were not exposed much to the Super System, to seek it out with any regularity or use it to pass the time, or to get their game on. Overall, it is a good game. I mean, it's Breakout after all. I cannot rate it too highly, sadly, because of the controller. It looks good and sounds good, although the 5200 is way more powerful than what you actually see and hear in this game. I truly believe there is fun to be had in any game, and this one can deliver. But since I have working paddle controllers, several working 2600 consoles, and some Breakout Super Breakout cartridges for the 2600, I don't ever see myself selecting 5200 Super Breakout over these. Unless it's a matter of the 5200 is already hooked up, so why not? I will admit, however, while recording footage for this video, I found myself more and more determined to get better and better at the game. And while I'm hovering around 300 points high scores in some of the games, lower in some of the other ones, I feel like I should be able to crack 1,000 on at least one of the game modes before I shelve this game for the long term. Next, I hope you're prepared for the Pro System as we attempt to qualify for Pro Gamer position. See you next mission. Before we begin, I'd like to direct you to the link in the description for the No Swear Gamers review of this game that I'm about to review. I've been aware of his channel and a fan for a long time. I'm even in his Discord. And unlike the Atari Archive, the No Swear Gamer does know I exist. It's been a while since we've been in contact with each other, but I won one of his giveaways way back when, a number of years ago. And my Atari Golf cartridge came directly from him. So go check him out, and then come back here and see what I have to say about pole position 2. We visit the first console I ever had daily access to in this retro game review of Pole Position 2 for the Atari 7800 Pro System. The Atari 7800 holds a very, very special place in my heart, and I'm not oblivious to its flaws, but have such fond memories that I sometimes take it personally when I hear and read that it's a failed console. While the criticism is on the harsh side, it did fail at many, many things. The ambient structure in and around Atari during its manufacture, test release, and eventual full release did nothing but curse its potential over and over again. I'm not here to criticize too much the business decisions and mismanagement of this system, but it is silly for me to pretend these things didn't happen, and we can all wonder what could have been for this console if anyone had stopped to question those decision makers. Our last review covered Super Breakout for the 5200, and I alluded to the Pokey chip in all of its audio glory. For the 7800, not included. There were 2 original releases that included the Pokey chip in the carts, but I think you can see right off the bat what a money pit strategy that could end up being. So most developers for the 7800 program the games just with the 2600 audio capability. At least they got the backwards compatibility right. Okay, pole position 2, the pack-in. Well, for those of us in NTSC land. In my youth. It's the mid-1980s. Young Evad hears his family all upstairs, wondering what is going on. Evad heads up to check it out. Mom and Sis are watching Dad hook up to the television set a gaming console. We got an Atari! Evad is dumbfounded. Video games! Evad is excited. The details aren't much more clear than what I just described. But on day 1, we had 4 games. One of them being Pole Position 2. My sister, roughly the age of learning how to drive, takes the Proline controller and gives it a shot. I can't say for sure what happened next, but I'm confident that a crash occurred, instilling her with confidence for her road test in the near future. I have numerous more great memories of this game. I love it. I always have, and still do, enjoy a good racing game. And this was the one that effectively started it all for me. Pole Position 2 is a single-player racing style game. You play it like a racer, but it doesn't really track your position, except your starting slot after the qualification lap. It has 4 tracks to choose from, compared to the 2600 Pole Position 1's lone track. Each more difficult than the previous. Test, Fuji, Seaside, and Suzuka, or as I called them, Pyramid, Mountain, Seaside, and Valley Fair. Minnesota natives will understand the reference. You can select high or low gear using up and down on your joystick, and steer intuitively with left and right. The action buttons, well, I'm sure the manual will indicate which lever is the velocitator and which is the deceleratrix. Although for me, as is the case with numerous racing games, I don't really use the brake and I just let off the gas if I wish to slow down. But hey, out of my way, I'm a motorist. The look. Oh, it looks great. The backgrounds are superb. The sensation of speed and acceleration are remarkable for the era. The oil spills. Is it even oil if they're blue? Let's refer to the manual. Well, what do you know? They're puddles. The cars are a huge step up from the 2600 graphics, but only moderately so from the 5200. And even that's debatable. The crash animations are, although extreme, very well done. And really, I have no complaints about the look of this game. When you look at where you were 5 years ago with graphics, and where you are here with Pole Position 2, you can see a trend forming. The graphics are just going to get better and better as time goes on. So long as the developers take the time to do it right. Sound. I like it, but I also grew up with it. I can understand if the 2600 audio is not to your liking, especially on the console after the console that was supposed to replace it. But to me, the pre-post race jingle, the hum of the engine, it's good. Explosions sound great. No pokey, so it actually is a step back from 5200 Pole Position in the sound department. But they did very good with what they had to work with. Gameplay. First of all, I need to discuss, yet again, the controllers. North American gamers were blessed with the cool-looking Proline joysticks. I was very comfortable using these as a kid. Being left-handed, it also made 2600 games much more inclusive, at least before I adapted, well, as much as I ever would, to a right-handed world. My parents would complain about hand cramps. This was an alien concept to me, but hey, we got some Wico Ergo sticks out of it because Mom needed her nightly Centipede High score grind. minus the hand pain. As an adult, I'm grateful for this because I now understand firsthand what they were experiencing. It's not much of a secret anymore that the Genesis controller has some compatibility with the 2600 and 7800. In fact, nearly all 2600 joystick games work fine with it. The B button equals your action button. But 7800 games have some limitations with this setup. B is still your primary action button, but it effectively reads the secondary action button as being held down. This isn't a big deal for some titles. I did a high score grind of 7800 Dig Dug using a Genesis controller. Unfortunately, for pole position 2, with the brake button being held down perpetually, EVAD does not recommend it for this game. You can try it if you like, and you can let me know how far you get. 0 pixels traveled on the Fuji track is my prediction. The 2600 does have numerous third-party controllers, and I will go with that Wiko Ergo stick I mentioned earlier. You can't use brake with them, but you can play the game. PAL Regions had a more NES-style controller with their consoles. It had a thumbstick that was removable into a D-pad. Very, very interesting. You should check them out sometime. I'd love to get one, but at the time of this recording, I am without. Aftermarket versions of 2-button 7800 controllers exist, with even more of an NES style to them than these PAL controllers. However, the seller makes them on demand and charges far more than I'm willing to pay. I don't have the heart to lowball them or the justification to spend so much for a little bit of comfort. Okay, that was a long detour from the actual gameplay. The controls are good. It follows that solid mantra, a video game should be easy to learn and difficult to master, exceedingly well. 2600 pole position 1 players will notice high and low gears are flipped. Since I had played this game for many, many years before being exposed to the 2600 port of pole position, this is a non-issue for me. Not much to say. You'll get a feel for it, and if you keep at it, will improve nicely. The game doesn't cheat you very often. Sometimes the cars you attempt to pass will try to get you to crash into them. At least it feels that way. But it feels that way significantly less on this game than pole position 1 on the 2600. I haven't played the 5200 pole position 1 recently, or really enough, so I must decline a comparison on this matter with that game. But yeah, the gameplay is good. It feels natural, controls good, and as you improve, you develop a confidence that is very satisfying. Until you crash into a Fuji logo sign. How are those supposed to be helpful anyway? One downside to this game is the earning of time. When you complete each lap, you get an extended play, adding 60 seconds to your timer. If you're incapable of completing the lap within the allotted time, your game ends. I realize this is a consequence of a bygone era, so I can't be too critical. But I am glad that this feature did not stick around for future racing games. Even if I'm playing poorly, I like to be able to complete the race. Relevance today. Racing games are a dime a dozen. This isn't the first, it isn't the best. It's a lone, arbitrary step in a staircase that grows larger and larger on a regular basis. While I absolutely love this game, aside from 7800 Fanatics, which has a bit of an upsurge due to the amazing homebrew scene, this is a game that will likely be forgotten by most. Not completely lost to time, though, because cartridges are abundant. It was not only the NTSC pack-in, but for whatever reason, it could be purchased apart from the console as well. Did people lose or break their original carts? I don't know. Who would like this? 7800 fans probably already have it and will not hesitate to let you know if they like it or not. I do think this is a game that fans of behind-the-driver POV racing games would definitely enjoy. There are, indeed, better racing games out there, and it may or may not take a special personality to rate this game above any of the much later racing titles. The 4 tracks provide an abundance of degrees of challenge and difficulty, and for those who choose to grind it, there will always be an opportunity to improve. It has great replayability in that regard, but if you're like most, you will not want to grind this game with the ProLine controller. overall. The look, the sound, the gameplay, the controls, they're great. I enjoy them. This review being very subjective, however, as as I've mentioned, this is a game I've had since the early days of EVAD 999 as a gamer. I like it. There's nostalgia for it, and I could tell stories about this game for days and days and days, but this review has its limits. I was able to complete all 3 of the racetracks that I have completed in my childhood for the purposes of this video, but Suzuka is still a challenge I may have to tackle. Next. Now you're playing with power. See you next mission.